Scary Sleeping Stories, Volume 2. The Whistling Room. They told Claire the house was haunted, but she didn't believe in that kind of thing. Not really. It was an old Victorian rental just outside a sleepy town, surrounded by pine trees and a silence so thick it rang in her ears. Perfect for writing. Cheap. Quiet. Alone. Her kind of place. The landlord warned her about the third-floor room, said the door didn't stay locked, said strange things had happened, said the last tenant left in the middle of the night. "Which room?" she asked. He pointed. Top floor, end of the hall, faded blue door, brass knob. "And it whistles," he added, hesitating. "At night." She moved in anyway. Everything was fine, mostly. The power flickered sometimes. Lights buzzed. Typical old house stuff. The third-floor door stayed shut. She didn't bother opening it until the end of the week. That night, around 2:30 a.m., she heard whistling. Faint, melancholy, just 3 notes. Do, do, do. It stopped after 10 seconds. The next night, it lasted longer. Same tune, like a lullaby. It was coming from behind the blue door. She pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. But when she turned away, the door creaked open a half-inch behind her. The whistling came every night now, always at 2:33 a.m. She started locking the door. The sound still came. She stuffed a towel under the crack. The sound still came. She blasted white noise. The sound still came. And now, it was getting closer. The tune no longer sounded distant. It was right at the door, right at her ear. She set up her phone outside the room one night to record. In the morning, she played it back. First, silence, then footsteps, then a whisper. "Why won't you listen to me?" She deleted the recording. The door opened itself now. She'd find it ajar in the morning, just an inch or two, but enough to see the darkness inside. She pushed a chair against the knob. It screeched across the floor sometime after midnight. The whistling followed. Then one night, it changed. Instead of the tune, she heard a voice from inside the room. "Claire!" She ran, drove to a hotel an hour away. Didn't sleep, didn't go back the next day, but she had to. Her laptop was still there, her notes, her work. She told herself it was just stress, sleep paralysis, nerves. When she returned, the house was silent, except the third-floor door was wide open. Inside, empty. Dust, stale air. An old rocking chair in the corner. She didn't remember being there before. She turned to leave. The door slammed shut behind her, and the whistling started right behind her ear. They found the house abandoned months later, rent unpaid, furniture covered in dust. But on the third floor, in the blue room, the chair rocked softly on its own. And some nights, if the wind dies and the trees stay still, you can hear 3 slow notes drifting down from the top window. Do, do, do. The Weight Beneath Black Pines. There is something buried in the roots of the forest. It dreams of hunger, and it remembers your name. They say the black pines stretch forever. They don't show up on maps. The roads near them have no names. The locals call them whisper roads. Not because of the wind, but because if you walk long enough, you'll start to hear voices. Elias had heard the stories growing up, warnings told by candlelight, half laughed off by friends too scared to test them. But he wasn't a believer. Not until the letter came. It was postmarked from Barrow's End, a town that doesn't exist anymore. His uncle, Jeremiah Holt, had lived alone in a cabin deep in the pines. Reclusive, Strange. Elias hadn't seen him in years. The letter was written in a trembling hand. Elias. The ground here remembers things. The trees feed on more than sunlight. I see them in the corners now. Long-limbed, eyeless, crawling just beneath the bark. I've locked the cellar. You must never open it. Never. But I won't last much longer. Burn the cabin. Burn it all. And if they find you, don't run. They hunt by movement. I'm sorry. I should never have brought the stone here. Jai. The letter was dated 4 days before the police found Jeremiah hanging from a pine tree, 30 feet off the ground with no ladder or rope in sight. His cabin door was still locked from the inside. The authorities ruled it suicide. Elias didn't believe that for a second. He drove up alone. The pines thickened the further he went, swallowing sunlight. The road turned to dirt, then to gravel, then to nothing. He parked and walked the last half-mile with only the letter and a small gas can. Jeremiah's cabin stood like a scar in the clearing. 2 stories, weather-beaten, windows black as oil. The trees bent inward around it, branches tangled like ribs. Inside, it smelled of old wood and ash. Dust lay thick over everything. Books, stacked like towers, lined the floor, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Diagrams, star maps, anatomical sketches of things that weren't quite human. On the kitchen table was a tape recorder, still running. He pressed play. It whispers now, even when I sleep. It told me what's in the cellar. I didn't believe it until I saw it, moving. The stone was never meant to be unearthed. But it sings, Elias. It sings in the dark. The tape ended in static. He found the cellar door under a threadbare rug. It was iron-banded oak, bolted shut, etched with symbols matching those in Jeremiah's books. He should have burned it then. But curiosity is a sharper blade than fear. The bolt came free with effort. The door groaned as it opened. Cool air poured out, damp and heavy with rot. The stairs were steep, stone-carved, vanishing into darkness. He lit his flashlight and descended. At the bottom, a chamber, circular, carved from bedrock. Symbols traced every wall, glowing faintly where the light touched. In the center sat a black stone, the size of a coffin, pulsing slightly, as if breathing. He approached. There were nails embedded in the stone. Hundreds. Old, iron, rusted, as if someone had tried to seal something inside. Each nail had a scrap of paper wrapped around it, covered in writing too faded to read. Elias reached out. The air vibrated. His ears rang. And then, a whisper, so soft it almost wasn't there. Elias. He turned. The stairs were gone. Not behind a door. Not in shadow. Gone. The chamber was sealed. The walls began to move. Shapes formed in the stone. Long arms stretching, heads tilting, fingers with too many joints. They crawled from the walls, their movements silent, their skin gray and wet, like stone after rain. No eyes, no mouths. But still, they whispered, not aloud, inside his skull. 1,000 voices speaking at once, in a language that shouldn't exist. We are older than bone. We are the memory of the earth. The stone was our lock, the cabin, our tomb. He broke the seal. You opened the door. You belong to us now. Elias screamed. No one heard. The pines don't echo. He doesn't know how long he's been down here. Time doesn't move beneath the roots. Hunger fades. Sleep never comes. The stone is louder now. It sings endlessly, the sound like weeping metal and distant thunder. Sometimes he joins it. Sometimes he forgets his name. But when it rains above, the water leaks down through the stone, and in it, he sees faces, his uncle, his mother, strangers, all hollow, all watching, and every so often. He hears footsteps, people above, hikers, explorers, curious travelers, and he smiles. Because the door is open now, and the hollow ones are patient. The room with no corners. There was no official record of the building, no blueprint, no deed, no name on any map. It simply stood at the edge of the woods behind the long-abandoned Hartwell Asylum, a squat gray thing with walls that slouched inward like something ashamed of itself. Lena found it on a dare. She was the type of person who accepted dares like they were sacred rites. When her friends pushed her to go inside, she didn't hesitate. "You have to stay 10 minutes, said Travis, grinning like he didn't think she would. 10 minutes, and you win. She stepped inside without a word, flashlight flickering against the damp air. The door creaked shut behind her, not slamming, just closing. Firm and final. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the kind of quiet that presses on your skin, that crawls into your ears and makes your heartbeat feel indecent. She clicked her flashlight around the room, and a sour taste filled her mouth. It wasn't right. The walls bent, ever so slightly. The corners didn't exist, just soft, seamless curves where the floor met the wall met the ceiling. No hard edges, no exit signs, no windows. Just one room, no corners. Lena took a deep breath and counted in her head. 1 minute. The walls were a dull, pulsing gray like old skin. The floor felt soft under her boots, not quite carpet, not quite concrete. She heard a wet sound behind her. When she turned, there was nothing, only the memory of movement. 2 minutes. The light dimmed, not the flashlight, but the air itself. Like the shadows grew bolder, thicker. The smell changed too, metallic and sweet, like rot, soaked in perfume. She muttered to herself, "It's just a trick of the mind. You're alone. It's just a room." A whisper answered her, "No one's ever alone in here." 3 minutes. She spun, heart clawing at her chest. Her light caught something on the far wall. A shape, a smear. It looked like a face. No, not quite. The suggestion of a face. Half-formed, pressed into the wall like clay, mouth wide, eyes bulging. She stumbled back and hit another wall. It was warm, and it breathed. 4 minutes. The room was shrinking, she was sure of it. The walls pulsed with each breath she took, sinking with her body, matching her rhythm. Her boots were sinking now slightly, like the floor wanted to swallow her. She turned to the door. It was gone. Not blocked. Gone. The curve of the wall where it once was held no evidence that anything had ever opened there. Number... No. "Time is soft here," whispered the walls. "Like you." 5 minutes. Her flashlight sputtered, caught a flicker of motion. She wasn't alone anymore. In the far end of the room, though now it seemed endless, stood a figure. No details, just darker than the dark around it. And it had no corners either. It bent wrong, curved wrong, like it had been made in the image of something that hated humans, but tried to remember what they looked like. She closed her eyes and still saw it. 6 minutes. She tried to scream. No sound came out, only blood trickled from her lips, thick and slow, like her body was forgetting how to be alive. "Lena," it said in her own voice. "Lena, you brought yourself here." She backed away until her spine pressed against something that wasn't wall anymore. It pulsed, it opened, and something inside it whispered, Stay. 7 minutes. The air was thick now, hard to breathe, like syrup and grief. The figure didn't move, but every time she blinked, it was closer. Her flashlight died. The room hummed, a low, throbbing sound that came not from her ears, but from her teeth, her bones. She felt it vibrating her thoughts loose. 10 minutes, she whispered, just 10 minutes. You've been here longer than that, the figure said. 8 minutes. She was on her knees, coughing up moths. Tiny gray wings fluttered in the darkness, crawling into her ears, her mouth, her eyes. They whispered things too, secrets in voices that sounded like dead family members. Your mother knew this place. She came here first. She never left. 9 minutes. The floor melted, her legs sunk into it like mud. Hands, dozens of them, gripped her ankles beneath the surface. Small, cold hands, childlike, hungry. The figure towered now, its face splitting into 100 curving mouths. You were never dared. You were called. 10 minutes. The door opened behind her. Light. Real blessed golden light. She turned, sobbing, reaching for it, and froze. Her friends were outside, laughing, but she was still inside. She was watching herself from behind the wall. Travis held up a phone, grinning. Told you she'd chicken out. Barely made it a minute. Lena, another Lena, stepped out, brushing dust off her shoulders. I stayed the whole 10, she said. You owe me $50. The real Lena screamed. No one heard her. Inside the room with no corners, time curled like a dead spider. Her mouth opened wide. Moths spilled out. The door shut, and the walls exhaled.